Hey, it's Amy Hall here of the Two Glassy Ladies. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a tutorial on how to make one of my signature beads, the lampwork goddess. These sculptural pieces are a wonderful expression of the female form, and they really mean a lot to me, so I'm super excited to share with you today my process for making them. So hopefully if you're going to be attempting to make a goddess bead, you have a little bit of lampwork background already. These are some basic recommended skills that I'm suggesting that you have some mastery of before attempting a goddess bead. As far as your tools and materials go, you're going to want some sort of a graphite marver. You'll need a poker, something like a razor blade, and then your glass. I use frit, that's sort of optional. You will need lots of stringer, which you will want to get ready in advance. For preparation, you'll want to get, if you're going to be using frit in this bead at all, you'll want to get it out and ready to go. And yeah, you will want to pull several lengths of stringer in different thicknesses. A little bit thicker ones I use for the hair, maybe as much as 2 millimeters. And for some of the vines on the body and some of the more delicate stuff, they'd be more like 1 millimeter. So just kind of plan out in advance what you're wanting to do as far as decoration, and have a little bit more than you think that you're gonna need, because you don't want to not have enough when the time comes, when you've got that beautiful goddess bead already hot and going. So you are going to want to have a pretty good length of bead release on your mandrel. I use a 3/32 mandrel for these goddesses usually. You can go bigger or smaller if you want to, but you do want a good length to work with. Now the first step here, apart from cooking the crap out of that bead release because you want to make sure it's completely dry, is you're going to make just a single round bead close to the end, and then get ready to place a second round bead just a little ways up from the first one. Now how far apart they are is going to determine how tall the goddess is, basically, or how long her legs are, because this will make up the lower body. The next step here is to fill in the space between the two beads that you've made, and it's going to be sort of like a barrel shape here, but you're going to be making one end towards where the hips are going to be a little bit larger. So you will be adding a little bit more glass there. It's going to end up looking kind of like a bicone. So here I am just making the one end a little bit wider at the hips, because she's going to have hips, being a woman. And now we're going to shape this a little bit more, so we're going to heat it up really good and marver it on the graphite paddle there until we get that nice bicone shape. This is where I like to add some frit to the lower part of the body, because it's really easy to roll that bicone in there and melt all that frit in, and it just gives a little bit of interest on the legs. It is important to mention that when you're making a large sculptural bead like this, as our bead gets bigger, we need to keep all the parts of it hot, and the places where it's most likely to crack, actually the most likely one is right where the feet are. So you always want to be going back to that spot as you add the next parts, and just keep it hot. So we're going to add another gather of glass just around where her waist is going to be here. This is sort of just another round bead, basically. You can make it thicker or thinner depending on the size of waist that you're going for. This next part here is going to be the upper body and the chest, where the breasts are going to go. So this part is it's like another gather just around the top of the waist, and again you'll want to make this bigger or smaller depending on the proportions that you would like your lovely lady to have. And again, I cannot stress this enough, that you want to keep keep going back to that lower part of the bead and keeping it hot, and this is going to go in the reverse later on. If you're working on the bottom, keep going back to the top and put it back in the flame and try and keep the whole bead hot at all times. It's the most challenging part, really. And next we're going to flatten out this whole part of the body that we've done so far, which we're going to do on our graphite pad here. Just kind of heat up the whole thing and press it in. It takes a couple of heats and a couple of presses. You don't want it to be too thin, but you want it to be fairly uniform at this point. And keep in mind you're sucking the heat right out of this piece with the graphite there, so you're going to want to put it back into the flame and heat up the whole bead again before you continue. Make sure that you don't lose too much heat there. So for adding the neck and the head, it's going to be a small gather right at the very top of the bead there for the neck part, and you can bring it up as high as the head is going to go. And the head is just another round bead on the top of the neck piece there. So it's mostly just a lot of round beads, one after the other, appropriately placed. So this is the fun part. We get to add the bum, the tummy, and the breasts, and all of these are going to be just blobs of glass that we're going to place one at a time. Again, don't lose too much heat especially in the feet, but also in the head. But yeah, so this is placing the bum first. I guess the most important thing is to try not to let those globs touch, because then you get a unibum or a uniboob and it's kind of hard to separate them. So I try and just place them and then melt them in afterwards, and even place them a little bit further apart than you might think so they don't touch. So this here is going to be adding the tummy, and all of these elements, you can adjust the size to your own specifications. I tend to like to make them a little bit on the plumper side myself. The breasts I usually start out with as small as I can and then make them a little bit bigger because, again, the dreaded uniboob, which you probably will come across first time that you're trying to do this. So here I am just adding a little bit more glass to the breasts to make them a bit bigger and melting it in. You just add like a little bit on top of each one and then just melt it right in. So for sculpting some details in, I like to do a little V and some legs, and I use a razor blade to do this, kind of heat up just the area and just kind of poke it right in. This takes a little bit of practice to kind of get it just the way that you want it, but yeah, because you don't want to, if you heat it too much, then you'll lose this subtle decoration, but you do need to keep it warm, so that can be a bit of a challenge. And then, yeah, I'm going to use my poker here for the belly button. So heat up the belly and just poke it right in. This next part is really difficult for me to show with the camera setup that I have, but I'm going to be using my stringer to add the hair first. And I usually kind of just start around the face and work my way backwards, just drawing squiggly lines of stringer. I find that transparent colors work quite well for this. Sometimes I pull frit stringer to do this, and yeah, basically I just add like a whole bunch of layers. I use a thicker stringer. It's probably 1.5 to 2 millimeters in thickness because you have just a bit more control and it lets you add quite a bit of bulk of the hair that way. You just kind of go around, keep adding more until it looks good. Sometimes it's fun to use a bunch of different colors in the hair. And try and keep those feet warm. So here I am actually just warming up that bottom part of the bead again, which you want to go back and forth almost after each strand of hair that you lay down, but definitely if it looks like it's getting cool, give it a good blast of heat there. Yeah, spend quite a bit of time on the hair, kind of like in real life, except not really. Okay, so now this is adding some kind of squiggly scrolls of vines on the legs. And I like to do, you know, kind of like a curly Q. Usually, I don't necessarily make them the color of vines. I use whatever color I'm using. You could make them green if you wanted to make them look like real vines, but I just like to add a little bit of decoration and interest. Looks like I'm adding a little bit more of that darker color to the hair there. Use some aventurine stringer in this bead too, which is going to look really pretty. It's going to be very sparkly with the champagne rain frit that I used on the legs. Also has some of the aventurine in it, so it's going to be very, very sparkly and blingy. A lot of the time I will add dots in the hair as well, just kind of basically I decorate it as randomly as I want to. I don't always have much of a plan going in here, but I just kind of keep adding things until I like it. So now I'm adding some big dots. These are to make a flower in her hair, which I usually do with 3 big dots, which I then use my little razor blade to kind of poke into a flower shape. So yeah, just heat up the dots and press them with the center of the razor blade. It's a really great tool for this because it's quite small. Gives you a nice little line. And then I'll just add a little dot in the center and that'll finish the flower. And the last thing I need to do here is just give her some nipples, which are also optional. Some people don't really like the nipples, but I usually do. And yeah, then just give the whole thing a little bit more of a soak in the flame and get it all to an even temperature. And she's ready to go in the kiln. Okay, so it's the next day. She's been properly annealed. Took her out of the kiln and she looks just great. So thanks again for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and please stay tuned for more in the future.
Two Glassy Ladies Productions.